Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second installment in our Metro teaching class on the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. My name is Zach McDonnell, and today's class is called A Mind to Work, Unity of Purpose and Heart. We're going to be continuing our look at the restoration movement found in Ezra and Nehemiah, and specifically on the aspects of unity to see how we can apply similar principles to our own lives. Now, here's the challenge. Ezra and Nehemiah, to be completely honest, can be a little dry at times. It's very historical in its writing, very factual, lots of numbers, both of things like inventory and population census. A lot of different names are being thrown out, a lot of times without much context as to who those people are, and nor are they really ever seen again, other than a couple recurring characters like Ezra and Nehemiah themselves. And so, unless you've spent a good deal amount of time reading these books or have a familiarity with kind of biblical history, sometimes it can be hard to grasp what God might be telling you when you're reading these. And so that's going to be one of the challenges here. But to be honest, I think that God does have a lot to say, especially in these books. And in speaking on behalf of the teaching ministry, we hope that you can find something to reflect on with each of the classes, because there is a lot of depth to these books, and sometimes we just need a different lens to find something new. You know, for example, me reading in preparation for this class, I saw a lot of similarities in Ezra and Nehemiah with regards to the book of Acts, for example. The book of Acts was also written with a historical lens, with a lot of dates and names being thrown out there. We have similarity of themes in like building and rebuilding. We see a lot of recurring themes of like oppression from outside forces. And then, of course, we also see God moving in his people, both of these books. And so, you know, as we look into unity and what that means for our lives, I kind of wanted to kind of use the book of Acts as an example. You know, in Acts 2:42, we're quite familiar with the passage, but just highlight levels. You know, it talks about being devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. They shared everything that they had in common. They were together. They met together every single day in the temple courts, and then they praised God and enjoyed the favor of all the people. Though that was a kind of a highlight of what the passage says. Well, let's read what it says in the book of Ezra and see how that can compare. In Ezra chapter 3, it reads, "When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the Festival of Tabernacles. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments and with trumpets, with praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord, 'He is good, his love toward Israel endures forever.' And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid." A lot of different similarities that we can see in these passages. And so we're going to be taking a look at unity. And so my first point, very simply, is what is unity? You know, for us, it's we all have a pretty good understanding of what unity is, but let's look at it from the perspective of how it was applied and see how we ourselves can apply it. We're going to read in Nehemiah chapter 3, and it reads in verse 1, "Eliashib the high priest and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur son of Imri built next to them. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassenaah. They laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshuzabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, son of Bana, also made repairs. Next to them, repairs were made by men from Gibeon and Mizpah, Melasha of Gibeon and Jadon of Meronoth, places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Uzziel, son of Harhiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section, and Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. So what does this have to do with unity? Well, first and foremost, they were all there for the same reasons, to rebuild the wall. Each of them was different, right? And so that was one thing to keep in mind with unity. Unity does not mean being the same. We are all created differently, and we all are created for a different purpose. And all of us can contribute differently, even when it's not our strength. For example, we had priests, goldsmiths, perfume makers. These are not the professions of labor, yet they stepped up and contribute to building. And so sometimes we're asked to contribute when it's not our strength, but it's the heart that matters. And so my question is, where is your heart at? I'm going to pause my lesson very quickly to give a kind of a personal example of how I felt unity growing up and its impact on my life. For those of you who don't know me very well, I grew up in the Toronto church, and I went to a high school. I was blessed to go to a high school that had 9 other disciples in it. We were a commuting high school, and so it was kind of on the cusp of multiple regions within our church. So there were several, even though my teen ministry as a whole was fairly large, my school had kind of a mix of both of teens from multiple regions. And as a result, we had 10 disciples, myself included, at that high school. However, during my sophomore year, a certain letter circulated throughout our body of churches. And that letter brought to light and challenged a lot of what was going on across the various churches. Not specific to mine, but it caused a ripple effect that slowly ate away at my teen ministry over the next several months. For a lot of people, it was too much and they just walked away. For others, they became nitpicky. They began to grumble and complain, highlighting values or things that were in this letter, finding ways to put holes in the beliefs of their friends, and kind of not really caring what they said and how it might have hurt others. By the end of that summer, going into my junior year, I went from being one of 10 to being the only disciple left at my high school. Granted, not everyone stopped following or going to church. Some graduated from high school and stuff like that. But still, there was a drastic drop where I became the only disciple. My teen ministry specifically, though, we had over 80 people with full-time staff and teen leaders. And by the end, going into that summer, it had dropped to less than 20 with no more full-time staff, and pretty much all of the volunteer teen leaders had decided that they didn't want to be teen leaders anymore. During that time, I had 2 friends that I had been somewhat close with. We weren't necessarily the best of friends, but we'd grown up together, so we knew each other quite well. We did not have a lot in common, though. But when our teen ministry began to fall apart, we ended up becoming really the only 3 remaining teen disciples. So to kind of help keep each other strong, we decided to start praying together. We all went to different schools. So in order to do that, we decided every morning before school started, we would call each other up and pray. And we did this pretty much for the last semester of the school year. And then over the summer, we would hang out a lot and we would have very frequent D times, but we still continued to pray together every day. And looking back, it was such a challenging time watching so many friends and even team leaders too choose different paths. But I can say with absolute certainty, if it wasn't for those early morning prayer times, I could have easily followed the majority. And yet, thanks to those mornings, those guys became two of my best friends because we were unified to help one another stay close to God. And so going back to the lesson, my question is, where is your heart at? For example, even today we're called to build, right? We even recently had a service where areas of need were presented to our congregation with opportunities to serve. And, to be honest, it's a bit of a sobering thought to think that, we would even need a service fair to highlight what those needs are. Imagine the sight if each of us were focused always on building up God's people, serving where there were opportunity and giving where they saw the needs. Imagine what God could do with us if we were all unified in the work and we did it wholeheartedly. And similar to what we read, most of the time it's not about where your strength lies, but about the enthusiasm and the heart that you put into doing the task. I skipped over this passage, but I want to read it now. In verse 5 of Nehemiah 3, it says, "The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors." And at the end of the day, none of us want to be known or remembered as unwilling to put our shoulders to the work. But, when we don't have eyes and ears open to the needs around us, that can be perceived that way. I think of even in my own household, and if you grew up in a family, you can relate. When in my house, if things get left unattended or overlooked for too long, someone is going to take that as a personal offense, so to speak. That might not be the case, but that can be how it's perceived. In the same way, when we overlook one another, it can be perceived as being disunified and all that. For my next point is called Unity Under Oppression. And we're going to read Nehemiah chapter 4. Starting in verse 8, it reads, "They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, 'The strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall.' Also, our enemies said, 'Before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and kill them and put an end to their work.' Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, 'Wherever you turn, they will attack us.' Therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes.' When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other, and each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me." Here we see a group of people rising to put a stop to the building of the wall. The Jews, on the other hand, have no one to turn to, nowhere to go for help. Their only choice is to kind of solve the problems themselves. But they have each other, and in turn, that strengthens their unity. Don't you feel a greater sense of accomplishment when you overcome a challenge with a group? Recently, for example, my wife and I, we went on a double date to Level 99. Now, if you haven't been there before, what it is it's a place, it's in the Natick Mall, where they have all these challenges, these rooms full of puzzles that are both physically or mental challenges. And you have to work together as a group to accomplish the task. Sometimes it can require verbal communication or physical coordination, but whatever the challenge, each room has a 3-star rating, and your goal is to get as many stars as you can in the given time. And so then whenever you do well, there's this overwhelming sense of accomplishment because of the rating system. But how much more accomplished and unified do you feel when we're serving others in our church or studying the Bible with someone from your family group? The question that I have for you is, what helps you overcome the negative thoughts or unexpected obstacles? This for me is one of my biggest weaknesses. When problems or obstacles present themselves, no matter how the size of the speed bump, I can be so quick to react negatively. My knee-jerk reaction is to just throw my arms up in the air and wail, "I can't do this," which is actually quite a sobering thought when I see that exact reaction in my children. But sometimes all it takes is help from someone else to remove my tunnel vision that I may have put on a situation and to help me see the bigger picture. And so that goes into kind of my last point, which is, are you helping or are you hindering? Using the Nehemiah 4 again as kind of the main passage, in the verses we read, we see two groups of people, right? The first group are the Jews who were fighting to protect the city and build the wall. They're building with one hand and holding a sword in the other, but they were full of zeal. They were full of gratitude to God. They wanted something great for their families and for future generations. And so they fought and they built with all their heart. However, on the other side, we see people who are taunting the builders, trying to tear them down, threaten them, and stop them from completing their work. We may not necessarily be as obvious about it, but we ourselves can be like those people. Thinking of myself specifically, sometimes when I can kind of try to stop things from happening, might be when I, don't necessarily agree with some of the suggestions, or, when I'm asked to help with something that I may not consider my strength. Or sometimes if I have different expectations, like if the task was more effort than was originally described, those are ways that I can kind of deter or stop myself from being effective. And so it's important for us to take time to consider whether our actions or our words add to the effectiveness of the work being done, or do they take away? Just some examples of how we can hinder: sharing critical opinions without providing solutions, pointing out all the problems with someone's idea without having faith that God will use their efforts, not following through on what we're saying we'll do, lack of communication, making it difficult for those in charge, overcommitting, serving, giving, meeting needs, but doing too much, resulting in less than quality work. And biggest one, attitude, grumbling, complaining. These are all ways that we can hinder one another instead of building one another up and building unity. However, the great thing is that if you identify with any of these, repentance is right around the corner and doesn't take long. For the last little bit, I want to just look at exactly that, an opportunity where Nehemiah confronted those who were greedily charging others. It reads in Nehemiah chapter 5, I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, you are charging your own people interest. So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, as far as possible, we have brought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people, only for them to be sold back to us. They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say. So I continued, what you're doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the interest you are charging them. 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. We will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. What's great about this passage is that the nobles acknowledged their wrongdoing and repented immediately after Nehemiah confronts them. When our aim and our desire is to love God and please Him with our lives, we are able to repent and change our ways because we are motivated by His desires. And that's really ultimately the point of this lesson. And so in conclusion, just some highlights of what we ought to be looking for. We ought to be people who look for ways to build up God's people and His church, to be people of faith who see what can be done instead of its limitations, and to be people who are unified and work together to bring glory to God. Thank you for listening to my lesson. We do have some discussion questions that we posed at the end if you wanted to ponder these on your own or if you wanted to discuss them in your family groups. Those questions are, what are some ways you can build unity within your family group? What's a need you may have seen that may not be considered a strength of yours? What can you do to help have that need met? And lastly, ask someone close to you what they see in you. Do you see me as someone who leaps at the chance to meet needs? Do you see anything in me that might deter others from building? Again, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.